Thanks.
Charles Kagan, San Francisco. Agenda 21 and the One Bay Area Plan, I don't know how close you are to that, but it's an attempt to specify at a great degree of detail how people will be allowed to live.
Yes.
I mean, whether you will be allowed to have a lawn, you know, you're going to probably be required to live in a chicken coop of some sort. It's kind of a Borg lifestyle utopia.
Yeah.
And is there a legal basis for challenging that?
Yeah, there is a legal basis for challenging it. A lot of this stuff comes up through the environmental statutes that have been passed, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act. Home development in Southern California got effectively shut down because of the arroyo toad. You remember when John Roberts was in his confirmation hearings, and it almost got derailed because in one of his opinions he had called the arroyo toad the hapless toad who, for reasons of his own, lives his whole life in Southern California. That was my case, and the argument was the toad is not an article of commerce. I mean, these were not, you know, the jumping frogs of Calaveras County, and they didn't move across state lines, and so there was no authority to regulate them. But we lost that at the Court of Appeals. John Roberts was writing a dissent in that opinion, and the issue has not gone to the Supreme Court. But they're using these environmental laws as a hook to stop development, to stop growth. We've got a historical district where I live. They wanted to tell me if I changed my rose bushes from red to yellow, I had to get their approval. And I said, no, I don't. Well, we'll cite you. I said, fine, and your whole statute will get thrown out, because I guarantee you I'm going to fight it, because I'm free. When I work for myself, I don't charge anybody. Right? And so they let me change my rose bushes, okay? But we just got to say no. What is it Nancy Reagan said? Just say no, all right? And when they do this crap, just say no. And when they challenge you and cite you, you call us or you call Pacific Legal Foundation, and we will represent you to fight back this leviathan of government. Agenda 21 in particular is part of the same overall effort. I don't know the specifics other than they are using these environmental hooks to try and regulate land use, regulate what you eat, regulate where you live, regulate what you breathe. There's a new litigation that would, you know, a couple of years ago, they defined carbon monoxide as a noxious substance that they can regulate. I mean, when I exhale, right? We could be regulated here because we all exhaled. At least once, right, during the course of the last time. But yeah, no, you got to stop this stuff. And these guys they're Borgs. They're Borgs, and you got to stop them. All right. We're all going to use that Star Trek or Star Wars. Star Trek, right? We're going to Star Trek. James Kirk, come back. All right. That's right. Okay.
Miss, my name is Dan Scafani. I'm from Campbell, and I wanted to ask you about one of the initiatives we had. I don't remember exactly what the year was, but the basic thought there was that the illegal aliens were forbidden to collect 187, collect money from the state of California. That was overturned by a single judge.
Yep. I made this a part of my campaign for Attorney General. And had you had me as Attorney General, that law would be back being enforced. Because there's a provision in our state constitution, to go back to the law, that says until an initiative is held unconstitutional by a court of appeals or higher, it remains binding on everybody in the state except the parties to the case. Right? And that means that any official that is giving out benefits in violation of Prop 187, if their agency was not a party to that case, they are illegally expending taxpayer funds and can be sued and, love this, held personally liable. Because if they're illegally spending taxpayer funds, it makes no sense to make the taxpayer pay the fine from the case. And so if you've got an example in your community, or you read about it anywhere in the state, of somebody giving these benefits to illegals, find me a good facts case though. You know, when they exceeded the benefits that they gave out, and somebody who was a citizen who was entitled to them couldn't get them because the pot of money had ran out, let me know, and I will represent that person. Went to the hospital room and it was closed down, the trauma center, because they, you know, whatever the issue is, give me that good facts case, and we will revive Prop 187 because it's still good law, and then I'll guarantee you we will then control whether it gets appealed, because the higher courts have already upheld the restrictions on benefits in other cases. It was perfectly constitutional. I
really applaud you for mentioning the elimination of withholding. And I think if we could take all the involuntary withholding going on and force everybody to write a check, I think we would win a lot of very rich liberals over to the taxing them already crowd.
That's right. And those that we don't win over, let them write that check. Warren Buffett wants to raise his taxes. Let him do it. He can send the money. He doesn't need to pick my pocket at the same time. I agree.
I just don't hear enough of that.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
First public person I've heard that actually brought it to bear.
Look, Roosevelt and his brain trust designed this precisely to lull us into an expansive government where we wouldn't know the true costs. Well, the exciting thing about the debt fight last year is now we're starting to pay attention to the true cost. $14 trillion kind of caught our attention. And I don't know, I mean, you add in the unfunded liabilities. I've seen estimates that it may be as high as 50 or 70 trillion that we already are going to owe. And so, we've got to get a handle on this or we're all going to be speaking Chinese.
You mentioned in passing, the rule of law, and other speakers in this forum have talked in passing about the rule of law. Our intellectual basis of conservative movement is we lose the rule of law, we lose everything. And I'm particularly concerned about illegal immigration. I don't care what law you pass as a law.
Yes.
Adam Smith said he didn't care what the tariffs were, just make them consistent. I think we ought to be taking the same tack on illegal immigration. Pass something.
That's right. Well, two things. One, and until you pass something, enforce the laws that are already on the books. Right? And if we just did that, and if it wasn't working, then we could change it. But by ignoring it because you don't like it, you are undermining the rule of law. And not only that, look, let's quite frank, the lion's share of illegal immigrants right now come from poor countries in Mexico and Latin America. Right? And so they try and make this into a racial issue. It's not. I want to open the border broadly for everybody that comes here lawfully. I want to streamline the process. I want people who come here dedicated to the proposition that all men, all women, all human beings are created equal, that we have inalienable rights, that the purpose of government is to secure those rights. I want as many people who agree with that to come here and to earn a living rather than being on the receiving end of government welfare. We do that by streamlining the process. Right? We don't encourage them to come here unlawfully, to live in the shadows, fearful of even reporting crimes. It's immoral what we are doing because we are creating an outclass, an outlaw class within our society merely for the benefit of taking advantage of their labor. We ought to be offended that our government leaders are re-enslaving segments of our population for their benefit. And we can do that easily enough. But the will to do it requires that both business that takes advantage of the cheap labor and the civil rights groups that want the kind of dependence on government to foster because down the road they think they'll have another slate of voters. Those two groups need to come together, increase, streamline, and then enforce. That's all we need to do, and we can solve this problem.
Thank you so much for doing what you did this morning. Seems like you've got a wealth of knowledge rattling around in that head of yours. But if you could just kind of elaborate a little bit on how that went this morning with Prop 8.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, the issue in the California Supreme Court this morning was a very narrow one. Whether under California law, proponents of initiative either have a particularized injury different from the citizens that voted for their own initiative that would give them federal court standing. Because you can't just object to something that's being done unlawfully. It has to harm you in a different way than everybody else. You have to have some particularized injury. And I think the court was very receptive to Chuck Cooper's argument that because they are the authors of the initiative, they have a different interest in defending it than the citizens who voted for it. Right? And so that, I think, and then the second question was, or absent that, when the Attorney General refuses to defend an initiative we pass, does the proponent of the initiative have the authority to take the state's interest? And the California Supreme Court just has to answer either one of those yes for the federal court action and then proceed up to the courts of appeal and ultimately the Supreme Court where it belongs. And I think they will. I'm very encouraged by the argument this morning. question? I do. I work with Brad Dacus quite a bit at Pacific Justice, and they're doing some great work, particularly in informing folks of parents' rights in the schools. They've got a packet of information they send out so that when the teacher tells you, we can send your kid off to get an abortion, whatever, not give them an aspirin, but give them an abortion without your consent, not even without notifying you, even after the fact. Well, that's based on, here's another reason why it would be nice if we had an attorney general that knew what they were doing. There's a memo that the attorney general, when it was Bill Lockyer, wrote that deprives parents, that says that schools can refer kids out as young as 10, 12 years old, get abortions, parents never get notified. Now, the memo is written as a legal analysis saying they're obligated to do this. The legal analysis does not mention prevailing Supreme Court precedent that recognizes the right of parents to direct the upbringing of their children. And when you recognize that, the courts have been very clear that the parents have to be notified and there has to be a judicial bypass if the parents are obstructing and harming the child. But absent that, you have to follow the parent's view. Right? That's nowhere mentioned in that memo. The memo is fraudulent, and yet every state, every public school in this state is complying with it because it's the view of the Attorney General of the state. We need to repeal that and issue a memo that actually applies the Constitution. Brad Dacus is doing some great work on that stuff, and if you don't know the organization, Pacific Justice Institute, I encourage you to look up that as well. I'm going to close. I told you I had some books. Edited by Lee Edwards, forward by Ed Meese. There's 10 or 12 chapters in here by people like Mark Levin and me about different facets of the 30-year history of the freedom-based public interest law movement. And for anybody that is willing to support our Constitutional Litigation Center with a donation of $50, I will autograph and give you a free copy of the book. How's that sound? And I'll be back at tables for about 10 minutes because then I've got to run to the airport. Thank you all for coming and staying, and thank you all for the great work you do.
Thank you very much, John, for everything, and we'd like to give you a certificate of appreciation for a distinguished guest speaker, and what a yeoman's job for talking.